Just hold on, just hold on. Yes. No. Good evening to you, Melvin.
Hi, good evening. How are you doing?
Right. I'm doing fine. And you, how are you doing?
Great. I'm great. Thank you. Giving thanks.
Okay. I'm excited to have you on board.
Same here. My pleasure.
I remembered when I first met you, you gave a presentation last week, I think Monday it was. And I said to you, I really couldn't understand how someone could have so much information on the credit union. And I decided, you know what? It doesn't matter which part of the world that you would be, that I would bring you on board to have that discussion about the credit unions.
My pleasure to share knowledge, to share information with my people.
No, but normally in this program, the LACO program, I spoke to you about it, and it's what we normally do for the very some part of the program. Maybe in your case, because you are constrained with time. I want you to give us a background of who you are. From when I say the LACO, because you live in St. Lucia, you know what the LACO is. And I really want you to tell us about your bringing up, the school that you went to, what influenced you to get yourself so much involved in the credit union business.
Okay, my pleasure. My name is Melvin Edwards. I was born in Antigua, in St. John's, Antigua. My dad is from St. Kitts. My mom is from Tortola. They got married in 1942. In those days, Dominica was part of the Leeward Islands, told. Um, so my dad was a teacher, and he taught in schools across the region, across the sub-region, as a school principal. So he taught in Tortola, he taught in Antigua, where four of us were born. Then he was transferred to Nevis and then to St. Kitts. We left Antigua when I was probably months. So I knew myself in Nevis, where we spent 3 years, and then St. Kitts, where I really grew up. That's my fatherland in a sense. My grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side were both Edwards, in fact, and they're from Sandy Point in St. Kitts. That's the second town. Um, and I grew up in Sandy Point, went to Sandy Point Junior School. Then I went to the Irish Town um, Elementary School in Bastia when we had moved to Bastia from Sandy Point. Then I went on to the St. Kitts Nevis Grammar School, where I went right through, did my O levels and A levels. In those days, you did it through Cambridge. And yeah, I left. I was fortunate to leave the sixth form at age 17 and went straight to Caveville campus, possibly one of the youngest kids, thanks to a scholarship from the government of Canada. Um, I went to university at Caveville, UWI, with many persons from the Eastern Caribbean, um, many Dominicans, including Alwyn Bully, who I'm sure you know. Um, there were quite a few from Antigua, quite a few from St. Kitts, Grenada, etc. So it was quite a gathering of OECS and Barbados persons, a few Trinis, a few Jamaicans, but heavily Eastern Caribbean. That was 1968. If you were alive at that time, Cecil.
Yes, I
I
was.
spent 3 years at Cable, graduated in social sciences in 71, and went back to St. Kitts to work. I worked for 10 years. The first 2 years as a teacher, I taught French, Spanish, and history at the Sandy Point High School, and then I was conscripted to become the youth and culture officer for the country. This was 1973, and from 1973 until 81, I carried that post. We expanded from youth and culture into youth and community development. So Dominica at that time was very outstanding in terms of community self-help. You must have heard about that or known about that. All around the country, you had a lot of projects supported heavily by the British Development Division, the Canadians, etc. You may know MacDonald Thomas, MacDo they call him. He recently retired from CDB, is back in Dominica now, and we were colleagues um, at that time. But the self-help program, we basically copied it from Dominica, and it caught fire across from St. Vincent as well, and to some extent in Antigua, but certainly in St. Kitts, we made it, and Nevis, we made it really popular, and every community benefited from either basketball court, football, recreation, sports, as well as community centers. So we were very strong in building that. At the same time, culture was also huge in St. Kitts and Nevis. There's a lot of exchange between the islands, including Dominica. We brought Nightbox from Dominica to St. Kitts, and I was part of the formation of a cultural group called the Okolo Tegramantine group. We are basically drummers and dancers, and that group is still operating. We just celebrated its 50th year earlier this year. So I've been very steeped in culture, very steeped in history, very steeped in working with people. By 1981, I thought I had done what I had to do in terms of contributing back to my country. Incidentally, I studied in Wales. I did my master's in social and economic development in Wales. And my roommate was MacDonald Thomas. I don't know if MacDonald is listening, but we spent 12 months together as roommates and studying social sciences, economic development at the university, Swansea University, part of the University of Wales, 77 to 78. I think that's the early me. Then I saw an advertisement in the papers for a position of the Training and Development Officer for the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions, what we know as CCCU. I applied for it, and for some mad reason, they thought I was the best candidate, and they hired me. I was 30 years at that time, and I took it. And I had been very comfortable working regionally. So this took me to the wider region in terms of work, from the Bahamas right down to Guyana and Suriname. And I was the Training and Development Officer there for about 4 years, heavily managing a USAID, a CEDA project with the credit union system, basically to reorganize and to grow credit unions and to strengthen the management systems across the region. So right up, like I said, the re-energizing of the movement, I was part of that exercise in the 80s. I left CCCO and went into the area of small business, microfinance. You have an NDF in Dominica. They were in Grenada. This came out of to some extent, out of the Hurricane David experience, and also out of the Grenada Revolution in 1983. 81 or 80 was Hurricane David. And the Pan American Development Foundation, USA, thought they should provide some support to the countries to help to ignite a better opportunity for micro and small businesses in particular, because they were basically left to themselves in terms of self-employment. But again, at that time, the earliest NDF at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was the one in Dominica, headed by Mrs. Anita Bully. And I don't know if she's listening, but Anita became a compadre of mine through NDF, but I had known her through her dear husband, may his soul rest in peace, Alwyn, and an amazing lady. She basically was our guide in terms of NDF issues. I started the one in St. Kitts in terms of as executive director for 3 years. Then I was asked to run the regional program for the NDFs, financed by USAID, the Small Enterprise Assistance Project, which I did for like about 2-3 years, working out of Barbados, again, out of the Caribbean Association of Industry and Commerce, CIC. I left that later and then came to St. Lucia to run the NDF, because the person who was managing it, Mrs. Patricia Charles, she was about to retire. So I was happy to give back again to St. Lucia, where my wife is from, and I thought I should make a contribution there. Thereafter that, I went into my own consultancy During that period, however, I remained with credit unions. From having worked, I left work, I went into volunteering, and we basically started credit unions in St. Kitts. Nevis had a credit union since the 1970s, and you could say the rest is history. I spent a lot of time volunteering for the St. Kitts movement. Then I went onto the board of the CCCU, having taken quite a break, almost 5 years. I became a director in 1990 and moved right up to the executive to president somewhere around 1995 and served there until 1999. But by 1998, I was called to be the Caribbean representative to the World Council of Credit Unions. Yeah, WOCU, where to succeed my Jamaican colleague, Ren Douglas, and served on the World Council body and eventually became the chairman or presidente in terms of the Latin American countries. And I did that for close to 11 years. And I left, I retired before my time was up so that another Caribbean person can succeed me. Point is, having been at the World Council, Caribbean is too small a region to step off and stand for election. So I gave up my position after 2 years at the helm so that I could give my unexpired term to the next colleague, who was a lady, in fact, the first woman from the Caribbean to be on the WOCU board. Her name was Yvonne Ridgard from Jamaica. I think that's enough in terms of me. Apart from that, having served at credit unions at the highest level, I thought I should give back. And 1 year before leaving World Council, I heard of this program called Development Educators, DE, which is run by the US program. And I attended it. I went and paid my way, attended it, and figured this was too good a program to be left in the US or to just put on my resume. And therefore I decided to look for other colleagues from the Caribbean who had done the program, who had graduated. I found two colleagues, David Marquez from Trinidad and Darwin Manzano, also from Trinidad. And they worked with me along with some of my mentors from the US to start the Caribbean program. That was May of 2010. And since then, Carib D was born, started the first program in St. Lucia in May 2010. Second program was in Jamaica, September 2010. And thereafter, we've been running at least 3 to 4 programs per year across the region. I must say that in the early phases, we were very fortunate to get very strong support from Dominica. The Central Credit Union, as well as the National Credit Union, they sent quite a lot of their leaders, current on the board staff, potential directors to the Carib D program, especially in St. Lucia and in Dominica. We held 2 in Dominica. The first time anywhere in the world a program has been held back to back. This was in 2011, Carib D 4 and 5. They were held at the Holy Redeemer Retreat. I'm told that place has been destroyed since. I hope it is recovered, but we had memorable times there. And the program basically seeks to elevate the leadership, bringing them back to the principles, the ethics, the history of the credit union movement, so that people who are elected or who are employed in credit unions understand what this entity is about, understand the difference from a fisherman's co-op, from a farmer's co-op, from the Hucksters Association, for instance, and why a money type of co-op has to be managed in a certain way, has to be governed at a certain level of ethical as well as with skill levels, and therefore that program has really caught fire. We just completed, as you mentioned, the 47th edition in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I was really pleased to have so many Dominicans there from the National Credit Union to be part of that group, which is a large group of 52 persons. So this is us. We are part of a team of giving back to the movement that has helped us so much in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience, especially in the area of governance of financial institutions, at the same time of management of loans, of credit portfolios, the whole area of mobilizing people in their own interest to grow wealth. This is what credit unions are about. And I'm very proud to have given almost half of my life to the credit union system.
Boy, that was a very nice introduction to the program, Melvin. And I also want to say thank you so very much for the contribution that you would have made at Carib D 47 to the 52 participants who graduated sometime last week, Friday. But Melvin, all what you have said, it stemmed from the fact that you have been a Caribbean man, someone that, from your father's point of view as a teacher, would have helped to get other people to be more empowered. And so today I want you to help us to understand the origin of corporations.
Okay, thank you. It's this is a unique opportunity because you do this in the classroom, and it is an honor, Cecil, and I want to thank you for your bravery, your boldness, your leadership in this respect. In that, and by coincidence, it's really special to be doing this for Dominica in particular, through DBS. I said this because Dominica has held the record worldwide of having the population in credit unions that is the highest anywhere in the world across the 120 countries where credit unions flourish. In Dominica, the membership of credit unions is somewhere in the region, based on the World Council statistics, of over 72,000 members. But your population, based on, again, the records we have, the full population is just over 68,000. This speaks to the fact that Dominicans, two things. From the womb to the tomb, Dominicans have a tradition of making sure their child, even when the mother is pregnant, their child has a credit union account, has a passbook, joins a credit union. Yes, there's double accounts in that people may belong to their village credit union and still belong to national credit union or multiple account. But nevertheless, it is very clear that Dominicans who go overseas retain their membership of their credit union, and therefore the diaspora is a critical part of the membership of their credit union system at home. And this is a big part of strengthening and the uniqueness of the Dominica movement. In terms of the history, what I would like to say is that the written history of credit unions is heavily sourced from European sources. It is also influenced by North American sources, Canada and the United States. And they form the type of financial cooperative that we have in the Caribbean, in Dominica, is fashioned of the North American model, which was originated, in a sense, from the German model of cooperative, or what they may call a case populaire in the French system, but the German credit unions. They were really financial cooperatives. Cooperatives existed in Europe earlier than that. But from the Caribbean, the literature is the point I'm making. The literature, if not eclipsed, understated, did not state that our people had forms of cooperation among them, wherever they came from. Again, the coincidence that we're speaking to Dominica is also strong in that you are the only island country in the Eastern Caribbean, at least, where the original peoples still exist, the Kalinago. And their communities operated on very strong models of cooperation. I mean, solidarity to protect the family, to protect the group, to protect the village was critical. The whole question of having the elders who led the tribe, if you may call it, or the grouping, the nation. There were principles in terms of responsibility. Everybody had different roles to play: males, females, young people, the hunters, the farmers, etc. So there was a distribution of tasks, of work, of labor in these communities. But more than that, too, there was democracy in that people had a voice. We in the other parts of the Caribbean, because the Kalinago people were wiped out by the European settlers, were not able to build on that tradition, if you get me. Only in places like Guyana and Suriname, the larger countries, where the native peoples, they ran into the bush. They got away from the settlers and they remained. So the Bush Negroes in Suriname are an example. In Guyana, the Amerindian people, they call them the Bucks. They stayed in the forest, but the country was too huge for them to be enslaved by the Europeans who took over, and therefore it was the Africans who came next. This was in the 1500s. For the next 380 years, the transshipment of African people, largely from West Africa, and eventually, as they had depleted the stocks in West Africa, from Central Africa, the Congo. Okay, so the point I'm making is that in addition to the Kalinago, in the case of Dominica, forms of cooperation were brought across by the people who were the majority of the populations of all countries. And the African people in other countries, again, like Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad, the Indians who came basically in the 19th century as indentured servants, they also brought forms of cooperation that helped them to survive. But let's speak with the African element in that the whole question of working together at the periods when they had time off from the estate or the sugar plantation, which was basically on the weekend. The slave gardens where they could grow their crops, the methods of agriculture, the methods of irrigation came across from Africa. The housing, the mud huts, okay, that they built for themselves. Of course, there was some housing provided by the plantation owners, but they came with that kind of agriculture, of that type of architecture. Dominica, like most of our countries, has a lot of structures that are cut stone. Stone cutters, African stone cutters were a major part of the transshipment because they had those skills in cutting stone. You see your fort at the Cabrits. Who do you think built that? Who do you think cut those stones with that tradition? Brimstone in St. Kitts, where I'm from. Most of the buildings downtown in St. Kitts are cut stone at the base and at the top. Same thing in Roseau, because of the whole question of flooding and again the protection against hurricanes. But stone cutting was a major skill, and these skills came across from Africa. But more than that, because of the weekend markets where the slaves were allowed to trade, those traditions from West Africa, they survived the trip. They survived the trip across the Atlantic because people bring with them what they're accustomed to. Of course, there were some innovations in the new environment that they utilized, but look at the structure or the methods of the Dominica hucksters. In West Africa, people travel long distances, especially women, to trade. The whole question of carrying the load on their heads, and managing load, the whole question of how they balanced it on their heads while walking, while carrying a child, that is distinctly African. And the long distances, the way they traded food for dry goods, etc., the methods of storing their hard-earned coins, because access to money was very difficult in the slave period. So the point I'm making is that what you know as, for instance, this thing called, I don't know what you call it, but when you want to build a house in those days, It was
Kudme?
basically on a weekend, and people came together to help their
Kudme.
neighbors, colleagues. Kudme, thank you, which is basically from the French coup de main, lend me a hand, okay? A journée prêtée, or Jean Genet, okay? Where people gathered together to help one another. If there's a funeral, again, the traditions in terms of the funeral, in terms of the burial, the pouring of spirits, these are distinctively African traditions that came across, and they were utilized in good times and bad times to work with one another, to help one another. So cooperation, collaboration, the forms and the methods that survived West Africa were transformed here. And of course, there was adaptation to the Dominica context, to the St. Lucia context. The language that we use, as Paro said, we had to chant and sing to express our feeling from that wicked and cruel man. That was the only medicine to make him listen. And the soul calypso began. But the Creole, which was developed in Dominica and in the other islands, where there was a French and an English background in terms of who the planters, part of it was to be able to communicate in your own language so that the masters, the white masters, could not understand. Reason being, the slaves were mixed. They were separated from, as families, they were separated. So you may not have may not have come from the same tribe or the same group with the same language. So the language breakup was a deliberate ploy from since they were captured in Africa, so that they would not be able to conspire against the system, against their owners. So those who survived the trip, I'm saying, they found other inventive ways of survival and of growing, because again, they had to now grow in prosperity, grow in wealth. And the first thing is to have access to land, access to food, to be able to trade on a weekend, barter. This took a different level when emancipation came, Cecil, in 1834, and then apprenticeship for 4 years. When they became free from having to work on the estates, they were then able to access the money economy. So this is where the whole question of not just collaborating in fishing or in farming, or in irrigating your lands, they were able to get access to lands which were either unoccupied or which were no longer fertile for the estates. And therefore, people, if you look at most of the villages in Dominica, they grew up on they evolved on the edges of the estates. Okay, we went into bananas more into the 1950s, 1960s. So it was heavily sugar, even though many of the slaves in Dominica disappeared as well, or they escaped and became what you may call, they call them maroons in some case. But again, we use the term negmawang. But basically, those are the persons who ran away from the estate system and lived in the caves. The mountainous terrain in Dominica was good for that. But they were also able to retain some of the traditions from West Africa, which helped us to be distinctive in terms of our forms of survival. I'm saying since 1835, they were able to access money, shillings, pounds, shillings, pence, mainly pence and shillings. The interesting thing is that is where what you call sub in Dominica emerged. It came straight from West Africa. It's a tradition called ASU, ASU. You check in Ghana, parts of Nigeria, some other areas call it susu. It is misunderstood for the French being SOU, SOU, which is a penny in the French, but it's just coincidence of some. But it's the susu is basically a grouping of people who save together so that you can grow capital, and then everybody has a turn. So when it's my turn, I get a fairly large sum of money from the pool. And out of that, I'm able to either build a house or repair my house, or take care of my child's first communion, or to take care of their scholarship. might be for a wedding or funeral. But the point is, people were able to grow capital and get access to wealth because there was no access to any bank. Um, Even though banks came into the Caribbean, Barclays Bank came to the Caribbean in the 1800s. Barclays Bank financed, even from England, the slave trade, okay, in the 1700s. And then it transferred branches to the Caribbean because the plantation system needed finance to finance the trade. Then came other banks, Royal Bank of Canada. The cooperative banks came later on. The penny banks came out of the same German, Dutch, European tradition. But the ordinary people, as we know, as our parents know, could not access an account in the banks, the commercial banks, much less even to get a job in those banks. You had to be of a certain standard in the community. So the point I'm saying, the people had to have informal savings mechanisms, and this is basically what you call the sum. So we were part of this informal sector of how you grew money. By 1941, after the First World War was wrapping up, ended up in 1945, but by 1941, um, a, a Catholic priest, and this is the other leg now, the Catholic Church, the Catholic missionaries, were a key part of the history of credit unions coming to the Caribbean. A Catholic priest by the name of Father John Sullivan, he was a Jesuit. He was Irish. He was sent on mission to Boston, and that is where the U.S. credit union system was basically taking off for like not more than probably 30 years. And he understood, he learned what the credit union system was about there. He was then transferred to Jamaica in 41. And by 1942, he started the first two credit unions, Clerks, CLER, like the government employees, clerks, and the other one was Sodality. And thereafter, again, history, the credit union system multiplied in Jamaica, and the league, the National League, was formed somewhere around 1944 in Jamaica, so that there's a national body. Interestingly, the person who started credit unions in Dominica was a lady, as you or as many out there will know, Sister Alicia de Tremery. She was a Belgian nun who belonged to a different order to the Jesuits. But on her way to Dominica from Belgium, she and her Mother Superior, they stopped off in Jamaica. She was really a social worker coming at the request of the bishop in Dominica to help with the whole question of alleviating poverty, working with women in the rural communities to at least elevate themselves, grow their knowledge, and get their skills. And Sister Alicia, as you know, is legendary in Dominica. By 1951, working with a number of community leaders, and Mr. Geoff Robinson and there are several names. There are lots of names in the book by Kenneth Richards. He cites 21 persons, people who served to help other people. But these pioneers worked with Sister Alicia to form something like 16 to 18 credit unions across Dominica during the 1950s and 60s. I was fortunate to meet Sister Alicia in her latter years, just about 4 or 5 years before she migrated back to Belgium. But she did amazing work working with the local leaders. And the point again is, so the credit union, as we know, built on the tradition of the subs, of people working together, people helping people to grow and prosper, to build communities of wealth across Dominica and other Caribbean countries similarly. You may know that Sister Alicia also founded the first credit union in St. Martin. It's documented. She was very much involved in starting cooperatives as well as credit unions in Dominica, but also in St. Martin. Dutch St. Martin. So again, with the language of Belgium, which that was very easy to want to be there. So amazing history is there. I could go into more detail, but I guess you want to pause and ask a question. You want me to pause?
I would like to find out from you, Melvin, what is the influence that the colonial masters, the imperialists, had on us in the region in terms of really creating a good background for the cooperatives outside of the legislation that was enacted in Jamaica?
Okay, good question. The with the coming with the this had a lot to do. This had a lot to do with the ending of the war. It had a lot to do with the rise of social movements, um, trade unions in particular during the 1930s, the rise of the labor movement. It had to do also with persons who came back from the First World War, having served. They've seen the world and they came out much more enlightened and very concerned in terms of people's rights, the plight of the masses of poor people in the community. And there was intense pressure on the governments. The governments then were the legislators of the planters, the people who owned land, who owned large tracts of land, the same plantocracy. They controlled the legislature, the House of Assembly, as I may have called it in Dominique, across the region, the same formula. They made the laws. Eventually, by the 1940s, heavily driven again by the trade unions, who were much more vociferous in terms of better working conditions, better pay, and a stronger level of attention to alleviating poverty among the masses of people to get a great opportunity to grow. The colonial governments responded because at that time Dominica had a governor. You didn't have a president at that time. The constitution was not an independent one, the colonial one. So what happened basically was the legislation that the British had utilized in India. India was a colony of Britain, you may recall, at the same time as the Caribbean islands. And British India, again, had the same pressures. They allowed them to form cooperatives. They call them rural agricultural cooperatives. And some of them were also engaged in credit. So it was a piece of legislation called the Cooperative Societies Act, which came out of the Industrial Revolution, which is another piece of history, in that they had to develop for the poor people in England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. They had to develop this legislation called the Societies Industrial Legislation. In other words, to give people an opportunity to start societies or groups that could be formalized as against operating informally, where they can work together, where they can produce together and utilize the benefits of that production, sales, and marketing of those produce. That's the producer type cooperative. For the financial one, then they realized you had to have the law had to be broadened to take care of those that were buying and selling money, to put it simple. So in a sense, then the legislation was transshipped by the colonial office from India to the Caribbean and said, use this blueprint, okay, and see how you can adapt it. And by 1944, Jamaica had the first piece of legislation that was for cooperatives that was approved or passed by the colonial legislature at the time in that country. Having had it done there, it was again transferred, replicated in most of the other Caribbean countries where there were credit unions. So Dominica got its legislation somewhere in the late 1940s, because the other cooperatives had been formed before the credit union, before Roosevelt Credit Union. So it was the same legislation for the fish farm and other co-ops, as well as for the financial cooperative. So yes, the colonial masters were, as part of the the colonial effort to give what they call amelioration, to make a better life for these masses of poor people who had been freed from the estates and for whom jobs were difficult to get in their own communities and more so in the towns that had developed around the ports where they were exporting the sugar and importing the goods, the food and the dry goods for these populations. So there were embarrassing pieces of correspondence sent back by observers who were seeing the plight of these people and therefore what do we do with them? It came out in big times, especially after the war, after 1945. The other strand of it, Cecil, had to do with the migration of many of the younger people then after the Second World War. Britain had been bombed out. London, in particular, had been bombed heavily by the Germans. And there was a call to rebuild England. And who did they turn to? Again, the English-speaking people in the Caribbean to come and have a better life. And they were I don't want to say entrapped, but they were enticed to come to England. And I'm sure many of our grandparents, wasn't speaking, would have had that experience, went to London. The first ship was the Windrush that took many people from Jamaica, from the islands, St. Lucia, Dominica, Barbados, up to England. And after that, those trips continued. It was basically to help to provide the labor shortage that England was facing, construction, the train system that had been wrecked, to rebuild it. So many of our family members who went to England, many of our women who went to serve as nurses, as teachers, as house help, they migrated to England to help. But of course, you know the story. They didn't get their citizenship. It was called the British Nationality Act, but they were given virtually a permit. And when they thought that they had rights to live in England, there was a rude awakening, especially during the Thatcher period, and later on, that these people were basically in their latter years, having served to build England, they were really realized that you had no real citizenship rights. And that was another story. But again, interestingly, it was Caribbean people out of Jamaica, out of Dominica, out of Barbados, who started credit unions in the United Kingdom. They were not started out of Western Europe. They came straight from the Caribbean. And we are the ones who started credit unions in England in the late 1940s, in that same Windrush generation. Again, part of the whole question of survival. And then the white English realized the possibilities of this form of cooperative financing, and hence the story of the UK English movement is there.
No, Melvin, I want to find out from you in reference to the credit union. You are seeing now as you're going along that the credit union is building, is getting stronger. All right, we see that they are now going to do some kind of work to really increase their leverage with governments of the region and really to unite the credit unions in the region, in the sub-region. Help me to understand what was the regional integration of the credit union that would have helped us to be so strong financially.
Okay, thanks. Good question. But the integration came from, in a sense, I don't want to say success, but reasonably strong achievements on the ground. The growth was pretty slow but steady during the 1950s and the 1940s. It continued in the 1960s because, again, the people who were leading these credit unions were volunteers. Many of them had their full-time jobs within the public service. Ken Richards, for instance, was a public servant. People like Geoff Richardson, Geoff Robinson, Mr. Etienne, all of these folks, Alice Wills, these folks had jobs, but at the same time, they were also housewives who had their homes to run. And I mean, at that time, it was large families and heavy responsibilities. But nevertheless, the credit unions, they stuck. Same thing across the Caribbean, certainly in terms of Antigua, in terms of Barbados. They were fledgling. but they saw the value of having a national league that could coordinate them, hence the Dominica League, hence the Antigua League, hence the Barbados League. Most of these were formed in the 1960s, by and large in 1960, because the model came from Jamaica. The Trinidad League, ditto. The point was that they saw that value. By 19, let me get this right, by 1972, because the regional leaders had been meeting for like 8 years before in the 1960s. Remember in 1958, there was the Federation of the Caribbean at the government levels. So the whole concept of integration of federation was very much in the air. So there was a meeting that they called WICS, the West Indies Cooperative Credit Societies. It was more a convention than an institution. The leaders met, I think, is every 2 years in some island to basically advance thinking regionally to grow the system. How do you mobilize international support, etc. And also, big times, how do we lobby the governments to recognize this entity called cooperative credit unions? We have the legislation, but is there any attention? Is there any office that will support it? Is there a cooperative development department? So that kind of attention, that kind of advocacy, that kind of representation was being done in country as well as at the regional level. And the fourth meeting of WICS took place in Goodwill in your country, the Goodwill Primary School. And out of that meeting, this was in 1972, August the 17th to be exact, they decided to no longer meet as an informal grouping. They decided to form an entity called the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions. So Dominica was the birthplace of the CCCU as we know it today. That integration movement, again, at the regional level, building up from the village level, building up from the national level, became concretized in the CCCU as the apex body, which was then set up from Dominica into Trinidad. Then it moved later by 1980 to Barbados. And as I said, that's where I got this job to work with them regionally. And by 1997, we decided, well, the movement, the leadership decided to move the head office from Barbados to St. Kitts, where it is now operating, where it has its own property. It was renting in Barbados. And thanks to the support of the government at the time in St. Kitts, they decided to host the head office, and you saw the office there. The point is that the regional integration movement helped to strengthen this body so that it could provide the service to the national bodies, provide the guidance, provide the technical assistance, training, and at the same time lobby for an international body. In the same year, Cecil, that the CCC was formed, the leaders of the Caribbean movement saw they had the vision to be part of an international movement to start the global body. And the World Council of Credit Unions, as we know it, was formed later in that year, 1972. And the Caribbean is a founding member of the global body. So you understand the international role that these early leaders, including the Venerable Kenneth Richards, played. And again, I'd like to pay tribute to the service of this gentleman and so many other Dominicans that we know. Clement Carty just passed recently. There's a Mr. Hudson Savary, who I work with. I was fortunate to work with. He was the manager of the Rosa Credit Union. Everton Charles was a youngster, about my age at the time. He was the league manager. It was good to see a young man at the helm of the movement, and we worked together for at least 5 years in terms of strengthening the movement, not only in Dominica but across the region. So there are quite a lot of Dominicans who have played critical roles, not only at the national level but at the regional level.
No, no. Also, too, I have information that indicates that some in 2021, some 290 credit unions had 2.72 million members, some 48% of the population penetration, 68% of the economically activities, and $8.7 billion in assets. Wow, the credit union, our credit union in the region.
And that's US dollars, so multiplied by 2.7. Um, when you aggregate it, this is it's a strong movement. Um, I could say to you, Cecil, in maybe 15 years ago, I would say 20 years ago, across the region, the credit union system accounted for roughly 5% of the financial space. Okay. Over the last 20 years, the movement has really accelerated its penetration in the marketplace. And again, you got to give tribute to the recent current managers and presidents and directors that they saw the need to no longer be an appendage of the bank, but they saw themselves as competing for space and to provide better services, better products to their members as the numbers grew. And therefore, that sense of competitiveness, which overtook the earlier thinking that we're not here to compete, we're just here to basically provide a service to the members, and we'll have an account in the bank, but we'll be nice people. Now, across most of the islands, we account for at least 20% market share, despite the intense competition, not only of the commercial banks, but of other entities that have come into the play, insurance companies, what you may call payday lenders. The field is now much busier. But again, we got to give tribute to the wisdom of our credit union leaders in terms of the value. You spoke of integration earlier, the value and the importance strategically of merging, of amalgamating. Dominica had 16 credit unions back in the 1990s. I know that for a fact. At one stage, it was 19 credit unions. People like Ensley Pear, you had a registrar of credit, commission of cooperatives, Mr. Jean-Baptiste, all these people who served. They basically gave the support. But at one stage, the leadership saw the value of, look, why don't we amalgamate? Why don't we collaborate? Why don't we cooperate at the institutional level? And Dominica took off in mergers. You now have 6 credit unions instead of 6. Because the idea was, sorry?
No, I was about to ask you, you spoke about payday lenders and you spoke about the banks, and you said that they are competitors. What is the difference between the payday lenders, the banks, and the commercial banks, and that of a credit union?
But there are many differences, but the big ones are that the investors in a payday lending, these are private investors who put some money together to provide products and services, heavily loans at interest rates that are strong, but they're very aggressive in terms of the service and the turnaround time, and the market aggressively. But it's basically money invested by individual companies or persons. Commercial banks, again, the owners are basically corporations or few shareholders. The customers in both entities are not the owners. They're basically the customers who bring services to them from which they make their profit. In a credit union, it's a cooperative. It's a financial cooperative. Every single customer who is depositing his or her money, every single person who joins by buying shares, which you're putting at risk your money to buy shares in this entity, in St. Mary's Credit Union, for instance, in Girodel, or in Marigot Credit Union, they buy shares to have a stake in it so they could make their statement known at the annual general meeting. They're owners. So the customers are the owners in the credit union.
Why
The
you say
leadership,
that, Melvin? What is there any difference between a shareholder and a member, or is there, if you become a member, you automatically become a shareholder? Sometimes I'm confused
yes,
about it.
is correct. In the context of a cooperative, the member is a shareholder. You can't be a member unless you bought shares. We call them permanent shares, which you can't withdraw, because that is how the credit union is. That's the last, in a sense, funds to fall back on. It's the risk capital of the credit union. So every member is encouraged to buy a minimum level of ordinary shares, and you can build on that as you utilize the services. In addition to that, you make deposits that you can withdraw, whether they are regular savings or fixed deposits. But the member is in fact a shareholder in
Can
the
you withdraw that share? Can you withdraw that share that you have in the bank, in the credit union?
no.
Can't.
You could, if you're leaving the credit union buys the funds from you and hold it in a share transfer account. When you pass on, if you die, again, your shares are then available for sale to another member, but you don't withdraw your shares because they're permanent investment. So you basically put in what you can afford to invest in this entity. But you can bequeath those shares to your children, to your family, to a person you wish through the credit union. Unlike in a bank, the shares are not speculative. In other words, you don't gain value directly on it. You can't sell it for a profit. It remains at par value. Why? Because it's a pool to benefit the community of investors. But the credit union would have built up enough capital of its own to be able to hold those shares in a transfer mechanism that the next person who is interested in buying more shares or who wants to take a higher loan that has to be matched by a higher number of shares, that those funds will be transferred from the share transfer account.
No, I also want to find out in reference to regulations, because you spoke earlier on about regulations. Do you think that the regulations that we now have that is governing the credit unions, that they are of good value, or do you see there are needs for, or sorry, there is a need, sorry, for amendments of the regulations that we presently have?
Well, it's a natural progression. As I mentioned earlier, historically legislation came to Dominica in the 1940s, 1950s with Rosso before that. By 1990, it was recognized that the colonial legislation was archaic. It had expired. It was no longer relevant. And therefore, I think by 1996, 1999, Dominica got a new piece of legislation. That was the harmonized legislation that was developed by a group of us working with a team from the University of the West Indies in Cayville, the law faculty. Interestingly, again, Dominica, the head of that team was Professor, he was your president, help me here, Nicholas Liverpool. I was fortunate to work with former President Liverpool, Kenny Anthony, Errol Thomas. He was a judge. He served in Dominica for a while, but he served across the region, as well as a gentleman out of Grenada. And we worked in crafting a harmonized piece of legislation that worked for the Eastern Caribbean, not only the OECS, but also Barbados. And Barbados was first to pass it in 1990. And then that is where Dominica got its legislation around 1999. And then that as the competition, as the aggression, the growth took place, it also needed to be updated. So the legislation was updated somewhere around 2008, if not 2010 in Dominica, 2011 maybe. But around that period, those 3 years, the various islands passed the legislation. St. Vincent was the last to pass new legislation of that brand in 2012. So we are now at 2023. The law needs to be updated, in my view. I agree that it is because of the passage of time. and the need for relevance to a much more digital age, yes, the legislation needs to be updated. The regulations, interestingly, are much older. They're still 1999, virtually. And again, they too need to be developed. I've been part of a team that developed new regulations. We work closely with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank um, in 2013 to craft draft legislations. The question is the movement moving to lobby and interact with its regulatory bodies and with the Ministry of Finance in particular to have this legislation put before the House as consensus legislation? That has been the tone for the last 30 years of the government. They would not pass legislation unless the movement is in agreement, which I think is good, is enlightened. So it's basically consensus legislation that we've been part of, where the movement, the regulators, the Ministry of Finance, they collaborate and basically say, is this what the movement wants? And we get the craft, the final drafts put through. I was very fortunate to work with the people in Anguilla to pass the legislation late last year. Grenada now has a package of a new bill and new regulations, which we finished in December of 2022. And I'm reliably advised that they're going to go to Parliament with it pretty soon. St. Lucia, as I speak, has had its first reading in Parliament, and they're moving to the second and third reading. So the wind of modernization is on, Cecil, and we're hoping that soon Dominica, as one of the largest movements in the Eastern Caribbean, would see the need for consensus, both between the movement represented by the League and the regulatory body, your FSC, I think, as well as the ministry responsible to see
would
the
that
need.
affect deposits if it is not legislated?
Put it this way: the opportunities for growth will be stronger with the new legislation that I know of, because it is enabling legislation. It is not restrictive legislation. Yes, there are tighter provisions or rules in respect of accountability, in respect of reporting. This whole thing called international financial reporting standards, when it comes to especially loan loss, write-offs, bad lending, non-performing loans, they're much more this tighter in that respect. But in terms of investment, I could tell you, the credit unions will have greater latitude in terms of how they can invest the excess funds they have that are not available or not needed for lending. The existing legislation has been found to be a little restrictive. We're not going to go into speculative lending or speculative investment, rather, as if it were in terms of the stock market, etc. But there's also opportunity across the region in terms of investments that the new legislation provides good opportunities for. There are many other benefits in the draft legislation in terms of the requirement for credit unions to invest more money in member education. This is October, Cecil. This is International Credit Union Month. It's also International Creole Month. It's also the Financial Literacy Month. And what the legislation draft is encouraging is at least a certain percentage of the annual budget of credit unions is put into education, literacy, getting more young people on board to understand the credit union system and to understand how to manage their money, how to manage debt, the value of investing in savings. Where do you put your priority? Is it a piece of land? Is it repairing your house? Is it buying a home? Is it buying a car? These are essential, these are desirables, but the whole question of making prudent decisions in terms of utilizing the limited funds you have, and to what extent do you allow yourself to get into debt that you can't manage. Credit cards are fabulous, debit cards too, but again, you need to be, the younger person in particular, need to be much more educated, much more aware in terms of the risks of overextending yourself into debt.
No.
And of any financial institution, it is the burden of the credit unions to invest in that area of human capital.
I want to find.
So
I want to find out from you, Melvin, while we're talking about the legislations and to really modernize the credit unions. I want to find out whether those legislations will ensure that the credit unions and the cooperatives are really defined in, as we have spoken about in reference to CARICOM Financial Services Agreement. I want to know what the legislation would do towards that.
the legislation will be part. Well, it would be relevant. It would be linked. It would be aligned to the CARICOM Financial Services Agreement, because I was fortunate to sit, I think, at one of the very first meetings of that grouping. It's basically the meeting of the central bankers and other financial players. But we have a rule because of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, also because of the Treaty of Bastia, that drives the OECS, the whole question of the free movement of capital in particular, that we make sure that the legislation is harmonized. The thinking is this can't be just Dominica legislation. We have a currency that is shared with other countries in the ECCU. At the same time, convertibility. So, as I said earlier, you have members who are living in St. Kitts, who are living in St. Martin, who are living in Anguilla, who are living in Antigua. The movement of these people should not be artificially restricted. Nowadays, once ago, you could only be a Dominican to join the Central Credit Union or the Marigot Credit Union. Once you are a resident in Dominica, but you are not from Dominica and you're a CARICOM citizen, you are eligible to join a credit union. My credit union in St. Kitts, I have people from Guyana, people from Trinidad, people from Jamaica, people from Antigua who are members of my credit union, people from Dominica as well. So again, the free movement of people and capital has to be reflected in the structure and the openness of credit unions to these people. That's just another good example that you pointed me to, because again, with the coming of CARICOM Services Agreement, that has to help us to generate wealth across the region, across the borders, so that we really have a stronger integration movement driven by capital and the movement of capital.
Because I came from that training, I would like to see in the legislation. I would like to see in the legislation that they would advocate for extensive risk-based management training. Would you agree to that?
I certainly will. Again, the legislation is in the draft legislation. Risk-based financing is very strong because, again, the savings, the deposit that you mentioned there, is basically ordinary people's deposits. We have to be responsible in a fiscal way. In the same way as I just said, we want our young people, our members, to be financially literate so that they are fiscally responsible. We who are called to direct credit unions, we who are put on the credit committees, the supervisory committees, on the boards, have to be fiscally responsible. But we must also be fit and proper in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills, in terms of experience to oversee multi-million dollar institutions. So there has to be risk management in terms of especially the lending and the investment. Why? You got to protect the best interests of the depositors and the investors who are the shareholders and the members. There are persons in any financial entity who would try to do smart things. There are people who come to borrow, but really borrow above their means. The lenders, the underwriters in the credit unions have to be trained, have to be retrained, have to be supervised to make sure that the loans that we extend to all people with good intent are also utilized and repaid, because our credit unions have written off bad loans over the years, over the decades. Okay? And once
What do you
people
mean by
hear
written
that,
off? What do you mean by written off? Because when people hear the word written off, they tend to mean get rid of.
okay, um, because you need to account for that asset in your loan portfolio. Okay, if it is not being repaid, you cannot assume that it is earning interest anymore. So typically after 90 days, you assume that the loan is not functioning. It's basically non-performing. Therefore, what do you do with it? Is it collectible? So accounting wise, you need to know, not assume that the interest to be earned is going to go into revenue. They call it accruing. So you have to know, you now have to apply that loss of revenue against your income. In other words, the non-performing loans become a cost to the credit union in that it reduces the surplus, it reduces the profitability, and that is a cost to the credit union. It risks the member getting a decent dividend at the end of the financial year. And therefore, this is why credit unions encourage their members to borrow wisely and repay promptly, because it's an obligation not just to the manager or the president, it's an obligation to the members whose monies are in the pool. And the deposits are normally much more than the funds in the loan portfolio. Hence, you're very right that the whole question of risk-based management has to be front and center, because the members of staff, the members of the credit committee, the directors on the board have to balance the demand and the interests of the borrowers with the responsibility and the interests of the depositors, to whom they must pay an interest, a return for their deposits, and to whom they must pay a return, which we call a dividend, and sometimes is a rebate, a cash rebate on the good loans. So that is the call of the governance and the management at the top, which is very important, and therefore it has to be risk-based, because you can't put the people's deposits at risks. And that is how the credit unions have grown over the years, even though they've had to charge off or write off some of the bad loans against the revenue, which is again a loss. So we want to minimize or prevent loss as much as possible, like any other financial institution, but in whose interest? In the best interest of the thousands of members who have put their millions into the trust of the leadership elected and the leadership employed at these credit unions.
When we hear elected, we hear democracy. We hear one vote. We hear one share, one vote. But in reference to this system that we have of all of the credit unions in the region, or if not most, we elect people. There's a committee, a nomination committee, and there are also persons that can be elected from the floor. I want to find out from you what disadvantage it is to have people elected onto a board or onto a committee and do not have the shared experience or knowledge as to how to really help in managing the affairs of the credit unions.
All right. The democracy of the credit union is another unique factor. You asked me about the difference earlier. You don't have elections in a hall for the directorate of a bank or of a fast cash or payday lending institution. Only in cooperatives and more so credit unions that you have that. You come to your AGM and people make their voices heard, known, they vote, for approval of the accounts, they vote for how much money the credit union can borrow externally, etc. That's democracy. That's people helping people at the same time by being aware as to how the institution has been managed and taking those decisions as mature shareholders. The question of the spread, of course, your national bank has a structure like that in the sense that you have a wide shareholdership, nothing close to the credit unions, which is basically almost 70,000 people. The democracy in terms of the nominations committee. Nominations committee is very useful once it does it right, in the sense of the nominations committee, it screens the membership for potential leaders. it is due to not only screen, but identify persons who are willing to serve, who have who are trainable, who also have some experience. You can't have all accountants or all business managers. There has to be a mix of skills at the top. People who understand people, people who are involved in organizations, people who are involved in government, who have some skills and experience in that way, so that the mix of skills comes together. They call it fit and proper. Where you're missing those skills, nobody comes to the board of a credit union with all the knowledge or with all the skills. However, having identified any shortcomings, the credit union and the credit union league is required or expected to provide that kind of training, that kind of exposure. And this is where Carib D, this is where your local trainers come in. This is where you bring them in to provide that kind of extra knowledge transfer. Your credit committee, people get elected from the floor, or they get elected through the nominations committee, but they still get elected by the floor, which gives assent to the recommendations of the nominations committee. They might not have all the skills in how to lend money in every area, how to do mortgages, how to grow a portfolio, to understand the whole question of repayment, collections, how to read the major indicators of a portfolio, a loan portfolio, especially in the area of business lending. Some of your credit unions have small business units. That's a very distinct area of lending. Agricultural lending, likewise. So the peculiarities of lending, you need expertise to help you, to guide you. And again, the credit union has these people to provide that extra knowledge to the boards, to the top management, to the credit committee and the supervisory committee, which is the audit committee. Compliance is a big thing in terms of anti-money laundering, in terms of correspondent banking. Again, that knowledge resides in people within your country, within the industry, within the banking industry, other professionals, the auditors. So you got to bring that knowledge to them so that they're steeped in it and they get the exposure. One of the biggest things, the problem is being able to identify where we need extra knowledge. People in credit unions, I would say, should be able to indicate, look, I'm good in this area. I'm an engineer. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a businessman, but I don't have skills or knowledge in these areas. How can you help me? Well, you're trainable. So again, the credit union brings that knowledge to you. I could tell you, I did not, having gone through university, in terms of understanding the details of understanding a financial statement, I learned that in credit unions. Understanding parliamentary procedure, in terms of how you conduct a meeting, how do you manage the growth of a financial institution. I learned that in credit unions. How do you deal with a board meeting, the protocols, the procedures, preparing, managing minutes? Where do you learn that? I didn't go to school for that or university. I learned that on the ground in credit unions. And there are many like me, many thousands, who learned these skills and that knowledge through credit unions. And I'm saying it is by itself a university of knowledge, which is open to people because of the democratic structure. So therefore, we have to now keep this precious institution growing and strong without losing its identity, in that it continues to grow, maintaining its ethical value, at the same time being able to compete in a relevant sense with the other players in the market. And our strength is the people component.
While our strength is people component, we have seen credit unions with very large numbers in reference to members, but the asset base, the portfolio of the asset base is low. What would you make of that? What do you make of that credit union?
Well, if you say low, it depends on, I guess you're comparing it to other credit unions. It's a fair comparison. But if the asset base is low, it means the members across, as an average, are not investing enough in the growth of the credit union. It means that the leadership and the management have a challenge to attract the members with better products. It means also that the credit union has to modernize its processes, its business processes, with much more in terms of technology-based, technology-driven processes and products and services. It may also mean that the turnaround time in terms of service, in terms of processing decisions, is pretty slow, and therefore you got to compete. Competing means you got to bring your units of production up, your processes have to be sharper, and you have to utilize the automation, the technology, because the members choose where to go. The younger members, as you know, are not patient to stay in a line for long. Therefore, if you move to online services, if you move to more digitalized processes, there would then be more competition. Therefore, the assets will grow. Out of what? Out of more money being deposited, out of better loans being processed, better returns on the loans, and better returns on the investment. And if you're speaking of investment, if a credit union is short of funds, another credit union lends to it. This is how it should be done, that we interlend to strengthen each other, because there's enough funds in the system if only the credit unions trade with each other. Okay, it's a final point in terms of the cooperation among cooperatives that we do that. And we're doing that, I can tell you, Cecil, across the region, where credit unions are working with other credit unions in terms of investing with each other so that we can strengthen through trading, not only of knowledge and of people and of skills and products, but also transferring money. This is why we need a stronger capital market, so that credit unions in Jamaica, in Barbados, can trade with a credit union in Dominica and vice versa. And I'm saying to you, it's happening already. But we could do a better job if we get the legislation that would allow us to do the kind of things that credit unions in the United States and Canada can do, where we don't have to work everything through a commercial bank, that we can have our own central credit union, so to speak, that could facilitate the trade of these huge numbers of people and growing those assets into, into assets of quality.
Now, I want, as I come into the close of this beautiful discussion that we're having, Melvin, I want you to help me. Cooperatives are ideal catalysts for sustainable economic development at the grassroots level. How do you help in strengthening those words to make people understand that really and truly that cooperatives are really from the grassroots?
Well, it has to do with education. It has to do with good examples. You're provoking a point from me, or a thought from me, that the credit unions have moved at a pace and have grown into entities much larger than their sister cooperatives in farming, in manufacturing, in fisheries. That's a gap that the cooperative sector has to tackle with, because the growth of the other types of cooperatives is nowhere close. There's some countries where there's some very strong taxi cooperatives, very strong farmers cooperatives in Jamaica. Certainly in the area of manufacturing. In some countries, again, within the tourism sector, you have some very strong service cooperatives. It is something that it's a challenge that we have in terms of how do we leverage the cooperative ethic into other areas of the economy than just the money system. So that's work for us to do down the road. But back to your question in particular, the extent to which the people understand the value of cooperatives, I think you can never stop educating them enough, because the more they could see good examples in terms of what the benefit is. In other words, every year that you give out a major cash rebate, I hope people understand how they got that rebate. In other words, this is by the pooling of the funds, the good management of those resources, the people who took the loans, paying them back on time and, to the value as contracted, that has helped the credit union to pay the staff who do a good job in managing those funds so that you get a return. the interest you get on your deposit in the credit union. In many cases, credit union pay competitive interest, in some cases higher than other entities. Again, it is because we manage the funds in such a way that we can pay a margin. And that is because of the cooperative ethic, because the intent is behind there is people helping other people in this pool to grow and prosper so that we can grow a community of wealth within National Credit Union, within Central Credit Union, within Marigot, St. Mary's, West Coast Credit Unions. These are communities of wealth, and the people overseas who remit their funds back home to help to build their homes or to help their family, etc. That is also part of building a wider community of wealth that people can live dignified lives, and have an account of funds in the credit union that they could pass on to their family, their relatives, when the final day comes.
So do you see the corporate? Do you now see the credit unions? How would I say it? As a perfect bridge between the corps, individuals, and debt capitals. Do you see that?
Certainly, certainly. Because we understand now the value of managing debt capital. The credit unions have done extremely good work in that respect. They have really managed the whole question of intermediation, between debt as well as access to finance in that respect. So people have understood that I may be in debt, but I can get a loan. I will repay my loan once I have a good record. We don't have credit bureaus as yet, but people know that they have a good credit score with their institution. Anybody who goes into delinquency, which is beyond their control due to changing circumstances, the credit union understand that where you're being reckless in managing your funds, which is a minority, it happens with every financial institution, the wider group is able to protect or cushion the credit union from any major fallout because of those losses. But the wider group bears that loss. So yes, we do every day manage the whole question of debt capital. We do at the same time make sure that our capital base is adequate. And across Dominica, apart from the other countries, the whole question of growing the institutional capital is a key point. And that is one of the things in new legislation that is also being underlined or emphasized, the importance of capital adequacy, not only in terms of the share capital, but you have to grow from the surplus. Some must have to go into the reserves and then the retained earnings so that we are stronger as an institution. Because if there's any negative pressure, any contagion, so to speak, in the system, is the capital of the credit union that's going to be able to fall back on. So the capital strength of our credit union is extremely important. And that is the other value of building a strong league, that it could also provide those central services to the credit unions in Dominica and partner with other credit unions across the region.
My last question to you. In reference to the credit unions in the region, do you see us as convenient and responsive to our members or shareholders? And do you see the credit unions now as a profit institution and advocating towards us as members to take advantage of the credit union?
Well, the job is still to be done. We're not perfect. We've done a good job in the past. We have ways to go. There's some credit unions that are doing extremely well. A lot has to do with governance. A lot has to do with the management capacity and the whole approach. Credit unions are much more visible than 10 years ago. You listen to any radio, TV station, credit unions are advertising their services in a much more aggressive way, much higher frequency than say 10, 15 years ago. So it's much more visible. The buildings, etc. But as you grow in size and in complexity, and if you wish, in sophistication, you may run the risk of losing the common touch with your members. And this is why I continue to make the point that the member engagement is going to be crucial. So yes, we have the potential to be what you stated, huh? To be the ideal financial institution for the people, young, middle-aged, seniors. The seniors fully understand in most cases the value of the credit because they've seen what it has done to them, what it has done to help them. Our challenge is more the younger demographic, persons in the schools, the youngsters in the schools, the teachers, our young persons in the workforce, the self-employed people. We can't think we've done enough to bring the message of the value of cooperative finance to these sections of the populace. It is also important, Cecil, that we interface more closely with the technocrats in government, with the leaders of the private sector, that they understand the reason why credit unions are here, where they came from, and the purpose that we are serving in Dominica. In other words, to put it in a drastic sense, imagine Dominica without credit unions. This is a major part of the financial system. Imagine Dominica without the social security system. Okay, if things collapse and you don't have these two major defense walls, we would be in chaos. So the importance of this sector has to be constantly sold and told to the people who are the policy makers, to the people who are the legislators, because we can't operate only by crisis reaction. It has to be proactive so that they understand that we are part. There's a time at which, in terms of statistics and contribution to the macroeconomy, you couldn't find any data that is reflecting of the contribution of credit unions to jobs. Certainly in Dominica, you have well over 300, 400 persons, over 500 persons employed in credit unions. That's a major contribution. The contribution to housing is huge, again, by credit union financing. This data needs to be fed and shown within the macroeconomic data as to the value of credit unions in the system. But you don't wait for a crisis to happen to realize, yes, they were really contributing. So the extent to which that kind of economic contribution, in addition to the social capital that the credit unions are making, I mean, the contribution of credit unions to education, primary, secondary, and university level, is humongous. They put a lot of money into it, into transportation. But do we capture this data and feed it, that the technocrats in government, the policymakers, the guys who write the budget, the guys who write the papers for the World Bank, etc., do they see this as a distinct contribution that the 6 credit unions in Dominica are making? And that picture, that concern replicates across the region, that the contribution is there, but we're still halfway seen between the informal and the formal sector. And I'm saying we have migrated from the informal sector, even though our people base, our roots within the populace have to be continuously strengthened by financial literacy, by much more engagement, constant outreach to every place where people gather.
I said it was the last question, but I'm tempted.
I'm
tempted to ask you. I'm not so sure if he's listening, but the acting CEO of the National Cooperative Credit Union, I saw him in St. Kitts making a presentation on pearls, which I know that many people didn't have a very hands-on, persons present didn't have a hands-on in terms of what was done or what is pearls. And Curve Charles, did a fantastic job. You can help us to have a greater understanding of that kind of presentation that Curve Charles did.
I'm glad you raised the point, Cecil, because again, we tend to not value our people, the skills and talents of our people, until they become recognized overseas. Again, I spoke of Clement Carty. I mean, Mr. Teleback, who just passed recently, Hudson Saverin. These are amazing guys who have provided service, who have provided guidelines, across the region. Kurt Charles is a young man. He has been the chief financial officer of National Credit Union, And he has worked with us in Carib D in making presentations in St. Lucia. He's been with us in Trinidad, and he's been for the last 2 years. When we do the program in St. Kitts, he's made a presentation. His presentation, I agree with you on the pearls. Again, the new legislation will go into more detail in terms of pearls is the international standard utilized in developing countries for credit unions in terms of the safety and the soundness of the credit unions, which echoes your point about the risk management. And Kurth made I think, an outstanding presentation in St. Kitts at the Marriott Hotel on the ins and outs, the details of the Pearl system and what you monitor in terms of ratios, in terms of key indicators, so that a credit committee member, so that a director, so that a person who wants to be on the board and any employee in a credit union can understand how is my credit union doing. In other words, these are the lights that tell you where we're doing well, where we're not doing so well. These indicators are used in Nigeria, they're used in Kenya, they're used in Jamaica, they're used in Barbados, Trinidad, and in Dominica. And Kurth made that presentation to the group of 52 credit union leaders from the Cayman Islands right down to Guyana. And I agree with you that it was really mind-blowing in that many of them did not understand, and they were able to understand in those 2 hours the essentials, the rudiments of having standards, standards of reporting, standards of monitoring your credit union. And the PEARS is virtually that. And it's also a system that is automated and available for any credit union to utilize. I'm saying again, these are the kind of talents we have operating our systems every day, and who are sharing that knowledge not only in Dominica, but also across the region. And he was a brilliant example. And we were very fortunate to have his services. And we do hope that the National Credit Union, as well as Dominica, utilizes the talents and genius of people like him. We've had other Dominicans who work with us in Caribbean education and training. And like I said, these are the people we try to uplift. There's a young lady from West Credit Union, Casmin Charles, who's worked with us as a mentor in Carib D. So again, we try to expose talents who can make presentations and who can move to the level of international credit union development educator. Because Charles is an IQ, the International Credit Union Development Educator. We do hope that the 90 odd Dominicans who have done the Carib D program, that out of this group will come more IQs like Kurth Charles. But again, these are shining lights. And again, you yourself, Cecil, as a journalist in your full-time capacity, but as an avid credit unionist, would be able to spread the value that there are career paths. There are career paths in the credit union system that you could rise from being a messenger, you could rise from being a cleaner, you could rise from being a teller to become a general manager or CEO of a credit union. And there are people who we saw at that program in St. Kitts who were able to testify in terms of their own career growth and who have moved on and who will move on to become MBAs, CFAs, FCCAs in their own field, thanks to the drive, the trigger that the credit union education program has given them.
And I see that my team Phoenix, they are all tuned in, listening to you, especially Amanda in Barbados and Korea in Bahamas, Diana in St. Kitts, and Terry in Dominica. My team.
That's another network. That's another network. It was a pleasure to work with these guys in St. Kitts, but again, it's part of the spread of knowledge, part of the networking that we're trying to build through Carib D and in conjunction with the CCCU through these conferences that they hold to make sure younger people have an opportunity to be exposed to knowledge and to resolve problems that they think they have by just picking up the phone or a click of the cell phone to send a WhatsApp to somebody to find out that. And that's how we spread the knowledge. It's an amazing network that is being grown, that younger people, middle professionals, are utilizing. And thanks again for helping us to link these people together through programs like this. What you're doing here, Cecil, and through DBS is education, education of the populace in a very important institution called the credit union. And again, the whole question of the value of cooperation among cooperatives is so important that it has to be driven by cooperators.
And I really want to say to you, thank you so very much. I just want to say also good evening to Terry, the Carib D 47 of the Dominica group. I just want to say good evening to all of you all because you all are tuned. And all the other persons that I actually sent in some information to them that are tuned in. I just want to say to them, thank you so very much for listening to you, sir, as our mentor, for the kind of stuff that you were able to bring across the table during that 1 week. I mean, it's amazing, when you get to Carib D and you're told that you have to be in class from 8 o'clock after breakfast to leave at 9:30.
That's all. I don't know why you were doing that.
Working towards
why did you do it to yourself?
Working towards a project to ensure that we can graduate and to ensure that we can help spread the information to the wider Caribbean belt. For sure, I'm going to do my project. I can tell you that much. Myself and Terry have sat together and we have decided that we're doing a common project, and you will see our project sometime.
Looking forward. And Cecil, again, I want to thank you for your leadership in not just saying you're going to do it, but in implementing it. This interview, this telecast testifies to it. I want to also compliment you for promoting the colors and the symbols of Creolism and the madras that you're displaying right now in this discussion here tells us again it's Creole month. And I also want to congratulate the government and people of Dominica as you're about to celebrate the 44th anniversary of your independence. Again, you are a Commonwealth of Dominica and you are a credit union country, because we build through this country a Commonwealth of credit union capacity. And therefore, it is an interesting month where all these three factors come together, both the cooperative, the anniversary of independence, the Creole. It's an amazing month, and therefore I'm pretty sure Dominica is helping with activity. I've been to your Creole festival many times, and I'm sure it's good. So we are very honored to be part of this month and to have us on DBS for this program. I'm just saying it's a joy to be able to be sharing with you, and I wish you the best as a credit union leader, but also as a top journalist in your country, that we could continue to spread the word and advocate for the precious gem that is credit union. Thank you.
I decided not to take any calls tonight, but someone has been calling. So I'm just going to take that one call. I would appreciate if you take that one call. Good evening to you, caller.
Peace be unto you and yours until your distinguished guest, but it wasn't me. Anyway, as always, very interesting program, and tonight is a very good one. And I was impressed and feel proud to hear the gentleman speak about my beloved country, Barbados. We started, at that time, people went to Panama. Our relatives went to Panama to build the canal. And they sent back home pittance. They used to call it pittance. And they form a friendly society. They call it the Friendly Society. And as you say, yes, we have the taxi co-op. We have the teachers co-op. Yeah, there's a few, co-ops where people place their savings. So that is so true. And God bless the credit union, because have not for the credit union might not have a home. So I am thankful for the credit union. They made me who I am today, and a lot of us, because sometimes even people went to the banks with ideas to do something and was refused, and then when done, who they gave the idea to took it up and run with it. So I'm glad. I'm very proud of the credit union, and I'm glad you said that if you are not in your country, you could join. So that is very good for people like me and others. I'm not living here, but I'm here for a while. That you can put your little savings um, on the credit union. So that is very good. And sir, I salute you. You have a wealth of knowledge in the credit union. Continue to do good and continue to help those the less fortunate and those persons, because it is the less fortunate who build the credit union. You know, it wasn't those who had, it was the have-nots who built the credit union. So I hope you all will look out for those persons who started it and make sure that they are comfortable in their life and what they need in life. Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Joseph, you and the gentlemen, you all travel home safe. God bless Dominica. God bless DBS.
Thank you. And before you go, I wanted to say good night to my good friend, my mentor of my group of Team Phoenix, that is Lyndon. This tune.
Hello?
I was saying to you, I want you, before you go, to say good evening to my mentor, that is Lyndon Bayer, in Trinidad.
Okay. Well, Lyndon is on, yes. Lyndon, my friend from Trinidad, yeah, he has worked with us across the region. Avid mentor, great friend, worked with us in Cayman, worked with us in many countries, including Trinidad, and he could not wait to come to St. Kitts. Great believer in credit unions, and as the lady said a while ago, we are very pleased to work with an organization that is grassroots driven. It grew from the bottom up, and we have to keep it that way. It is the ordinary people's pennies and shillings that built this movement. There's a saying in scripture that if you're enjoying the shade under the tree, you need to understand where the tree came from and who built that tree and the roots of that tree. And while we enjoy the shade of the huge credit union system, we cannot lose sight or memory of how this entity was grown. And therefore, the successors, the people who are in leadership, need to understand where it came from and preserve the DNA of the credit union system. Good night, Lyndon. Keep it up.
And just again, before you go, I get a message saying, "Hi, Cecil, my regards to Melvin." That person is Linda Gonzalez Pelte. I am hoping this program can be relayed and passed on to the credit union. My group was Phoenix when I did my Carib D program.
Out of the ashes, the phoenix rises. My pleasure.
Thank you again, sir.
Thanks again. Okay.
God bless you, and thank you for the interview. I was really elated to know that I could speak to an illustrious man like your kind. It gave me great honor to really meet you when I met you in St. Kitts, and tonight is another great honor to have you doing an interview for the Dominican folks and those in the region listening at this time.
Thanks again. It's good to be in Laku, and I wish you all the best with this program. It's an amazing expose, and God bless you. Take care, Cecil.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
God bless you. Bye-bye. Yes. Well, that was Mr. Good friend of mine now, Mr. Melvin Edwards. He is right now the program director of Carib D, and I just want to wish him well. He has been doing well for us in the region. You have heard quite a lot of the esteemed positions that he held and where he is at this time. So I'll play this one again. I'm a Slave by Sparrow. A good one to end the LACO program tonight.
I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and I was brought here from Africa.